What is the appeal of ISIL and how did the group attract thousands to fight for its cause? We'll speak with one woman who knows firsthand. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu and this is The Heat. Three years ago, when ISIL was at its peak, the terror group was estimated to have 31,000 foreign fighters in Iraq and Syria, attracted from over 100 countries. Today, according to the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, that number is less than 1,000, and ISIL no longer controls vast territory. But analysts say the campaign against extremist ideology is far more challenging. Through social media, the militant group continues to attract followers and inspire terrorist attacks across the globe. Our first guest studied Islam, became radicalized with her husband and lived with her children in Egypt, Turkey and Syria. Tania Joya eventually became disillusioned with radical Islam and escaped from Syria with her children. She now works with organizations that are dedicated to countering violent extremism. Tania joins us from Dallas, Texas to share her story. Tania, thanks a lot for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yours is quite a story. Let me start in August of 2013. You were in Turkey, in the city of Gaziantep in eastern Turkey with your husband. He is an American who converted to Islam. You were there with 3 children. You were pregnant with a 4th child, and you crossed with this young family into Syria. Firstly, let me ask you, how did you end up in Turkey, and what was that experience like crossing into Syria?
We ended up in Turkey because my ex-husband was looking for work there. We were previously living in Egypt, but after the coup with the Sisi military, we decided we needed to leave. It was best to leave, and Turkey seemed like a nice place to live. But then my ex-husband decided to move. He said that living in Istanbul was very expensive, and since he was an Arabic translator, he said it's best if we live on the east side, so we ended up going to Gaziantep. We had some trouble finding accommodation at the time because refugees were given priority to living in the hotels, and I wasn't going to stay in a hostel. So like 2 a.m. in the morning, a bus comes up, and while we're waiting outside, and my husband told me and my children to get onto the bus because it's going to take us somewhere where we can live temporarily. And so it was 2 a.m., I'm pregnant, my kids and I are exhausted, and we're outside with our luggage. So we got on the bus, and then as we were driving, I realized when we got to the checkpoint what my ex-husband was where he was taking me. And he promised me it would only be 2 weeks because we weren't properly prepared for living in Turkey, or like with money being transferred and things. So we had our problems there. So he said, we stay in Syria for 2 weeks and then we'll go back to Turkey. Because the plan was to never go to Syria from my end. For years, my ex-husband and I argued and discussed. We didn't always argue, but I told my husband I wouldn't go to Syria with my children. And I said I was happy to help rebels and the cause for Syria's freedom from Turkey, but not inside Syria. And I said I wouldn't return unless I'm going to Damascus. And so once we got to Syria, I was just waiting each day to get out of Syria. But then after 2 weeks, I realized my ex-husband wasn't planning to leave. He was encouraged by the locals to stay because they needed somebody with his skill set to help them. And I wouldn't stay. So I left with my children and returned to Turkey, and then came back to the US with my children.
Okay, let's go back to London. You grew up in London. You are of Bangladeshi origin, but you grew up just outside London. Did you come from a very devout religious family?
They were culturally religious. I think Bengali culture was the priority of Islam, but Islam was used as a means of controlling us. And my family are more religious now than they were in the 80s and 90s. so to speak. I wasn't religious, but we were made to read the Quran for 2 hours a day, reading in a Persian Arabic script that we had no idea or understanding what it means, but we were told that it's God's word and it's important and you have to prioritize the religion before anything else. So that's my religion.
Right, so you say you were not very religious, but you became a very staunch follower of Islam. And at any time, did you consider yourself a radical Muslim? Would you be prepared at any time, did you think, to kill someone or be killed for your religion?
So, like, I viewed Islam as a political system, and I myself did not want to do any killing. You know, I did at the time when I was a radical. It was during my adolescent years when I was about 17 years old when I became aware of political Islam after September 11th, and I became more aware about the effects of the Cold War. And, you know, I'd moved to a different location in England where it was where there was a high population of conservative Muslims. And of course I wanted to fit in when I was young, and I was also being exposed to lots of different historical ideas that I thought was my history as a Muslim. And I felt the need to do something to help innocent Muslims who were being attacked by Western imperialists, like, you know, or American capitalist agendas. I felt like I wanted to help the third world, and I thought Islam was the solution to all the world's problems, but I was very young, very naive, and it was after I had children that helped normalize me, and I learned to put my priorities in order.
Okay, you say that you moved to a very conservative part of London. Where did you become radicalized? Was it at school? Was it with your friends? Was it at a mosque?
Yeah, so it was, I moved to East London, or Barking, which is Essex area near East London, and there I had more exposure to relatives that were part of HT, Hizb ut-Tahrir, and so they introduced me to the political side of the caliphate, and then I had friends at school who were part of Al-Muhajirun. And then I had the Salafi friends, but they were at the time they were not they weren't talking about a caliphate. They were more pro Saudi Arabia, and but they were Wahhabis nonetheless, and they did to some extent support Al Qaeda. So, but at the time when I made this group of friends, I thought I was doing something good, as I thought I was joining a good crowd of girls who didn't expose themselves to boyfriends or sex or pop culture. They were praying and they were fasting and they didn't gossip, and you know, so there was a lot about them that attracted me as a youth to that circle of friends because they had a nice sisterhood.
Right, your ex-husband. He's American, he's Texan, he converted to Islam. How did you meet and what kind of influence did he have on you?
Yeah, so growing up, I'll be very honest, I wasn't raised in my Bengali family. I wasn't raised to be a free-thinking, independent-minded, opinionated woman. I was, you know, sort of groomed to be a good wife, a good mother, a good somebody who, you know, has limited roles and is, you know, motherhood defines who we are and is our purpose. So when I got married, you know, my ex-husband at the time was in authority over me, and Islam gave him that authority over me because it says that you obey Allah and His Messenger and those in authority over you, and that would mean Muslim men. And at the time when I was young, I didn't really question God. I was afraid to question these rules, these misogynist concepts. But it took maturity and knowledge until I sort of wised up.
But it must have been a very close relationship because, you know, you had 3 children when you went to Syria. You were pregnant with a 4th. You followed your husband literally around the world. At what point did you start becoming disillusioned with Islam and what his plans were?
So to go back on part of your question, I wasn't, I did follow, but it was more like I was enslaved. I felt like I had no choice. He owned me. I had nowhere to go. Like, I had no family to go to. His family didn't really believe me about my concerns I had with John. And he was the only, even with children, my body wasn't something I owned. We, as Muslims, we're slaves to God. And when it comes to children and contraception, it's not entirely up to the woman. In fact, most religious, devout Muslim women have very little say. When it's up to the man. And so I had children by his will, and it wasn't necessarily what I wanted.
Right. You were in Syria up to the point when you reached the Syrian border. You had no idea that your husband was going to be taking you into Syria. You went in there. How long were you in Syria, and what was that experience like? Where did you live?
So we were in Azaz for 3 weeks, which is right next to the Turkish border, very close. And at the time, it was very distressing.
How did you leave?
So I left by, well, there were blockades for many days, which is the reason why it took 3 weeks for me to get out. I would have gotten out earlier if the roads weren't blocked. But like, there was a whole scenario where we had to cross a field and with mines, but there were signs saying don't step on this area or this area, there are mines. So we knew where we had to, which track to go, but there was a lot of running involved. We had to cross through a barbed wire fence while there were snipers shooting at on posts, 2 posts, and it was very deadly and dangerous. Then my ex-husband put us on a human trafficking truck, paid the guy, and told him to take us to the bus station in Turkey. And then once we were on the truck, which was really rough and difficult because I was pregnant, and the truck wasn't actually driving on a road, it was driving on a field. The truck driver, the trafficker just left me somewhere in Turkey, and everybody else scattered, but I didn't know where to go. Then a stranger came and helped me and took me to the bus station. From the bus station, I went to the airport.
So your husband didn't leave with you?
No, he wouldn't return. He wouldn't, I begged him to stay for the children's sake, but I don't know, maybe he was selfish, or his priority was the religion and the cause of, sorry, it's very hard for me to talk about, but...
Do you ever see him? Do the children see him?
No. I stopped contact between them after the first year of after we separated. And it increasingly became very difficult for him to contact me because the internet cafes were being bombed, and for security reasons he couldn't message me or, through Telegram or Skype with me.
Right.
But I haven't spoken to him in over a year.
And where is your ex-husband right now?
Over a year ago, he was in Raqqa, near the Euphrates, but I don't know where he is or what's happened to him since then.
So you made your way to Istanbul, you returned to the United States, you now live in Texas. What is your life like now?
Well, I've got a taste of freedom, and I am never going back on that. I really, you see, while I was living in the States with my husband, even in like 2008 period, I was learning more about American values, and that really changed my mind. Like, I realized, hang on, I was born believing in one system, having Islamic values, but I appreciated the American values more, and I felt that this was more in tune with human nature, and humans want freedom, and I was born into believing I'm a slave to God, but I didn't feel like it was my choice. But with American values, I realized there is a choice.
So what are your religious beliefs right now? Are you still a Muslim? Do you still believe in a caliphate?
No, I don't believe in a caliphate. From learning the history of the caliphs and the caliphates and how they really were self-destructive, that idealistic youth that that was very one-track and narrow-minded, that person in me is gone. I'm not a Muslim. I don't consider myself a slave to any religion, and I'm just me. I'm free, and I want to do good, and I want to help other people, change their lives around, and get back their identity. Not just be involved in some historical war that really is not related to them, but they feel tied to. I want to free them from that idea.
Tania Joya, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Time right now for a break. Next, we'll speak with a journalist who documented one mother's mission to save her daughter from Syria. Stay with us, you're watching The Heat.